Hey now, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and today we are not talking about board games. This is episode 1 of Optional Variants, which will be a slightly irregular released series that talks about some of the other things I like besides tabletop gaming. Movies, TV shows, maybe even weird things like podcasts and music and books. I say weird just because I don't know how that's going to translate to video form, but who knows, the sky's the limit. I just want to talk about some of the things that I really enjoy, or at least find interesting in the rest of pop culture. And we're going to start off with anime, specifically my top 10 anime series of all times. Not movies. I might do a top 10 movies at some point, and hopefully it won't all just be Miyazaki, and maybe I'll just make it a top 10 Miyazaki movies list, but this is just series. Anything that had at least a few episodes, even if it was just a brief OVA series, was potentially eligible for the list, but although I don't think my final top 10 had many really short series, maybe just a couple of slightly shorter series. In any event, my brief history of anime, like any kid growing up in the 80s, I watched a lot of stuff that I didn't really recognize as anime. I didn't know that word. I didn't know that Japanese animation was like a thing. I just knew that this was animation that was different than the rest of the stuff I saw on TV. Robotech, which was actually a blend of 3 different anime series, but again, I didn't know that as a kid in America in the 80s. Voltron, I mean, these were amazing shows that just were so different and great compared to all the other direct that was Saturday morning cartoons. Now, when I got a little bit older, my mom and I used to watch she was a maniac, she let me watch anything. We watched really bad direct to VHS sci-fi and fantasy movies, which were terrible and really violent. I was like 11 years old. We watched a movie called The Guyver, which I didn't know at the time was based off of an anime manga, a manga and an anime series. And it starred Mark Hamill, by the way, of note. This is when he was really on the downswing of his career. But I liked it. It was cheesy, guy in a suit fighting monsters. And for the following Christmas, my mom got me the anime version, which she stumbled across at the local Suncoast Motion Picture Company in our mall, which, by the way, back in the early 90s, that was the only place you could find anime. At these Suncoast Motion Picture Company stores, which are now defunct, I think, there was a tiny little sliver of one shelf that was dedicated to Japanese animation, and they called it Japanime back then, and it was like ridiculously expensive. Like one half-hour video cost you like $30 or $35, depending on if you wanted it dubbed or English subtitled. But I loved it. I was after she got me the first video, I was begging my mom to get me every single following video, even though they were incredibly gory, violent. I don't think she knew just how violent they were, but I really enjoyed them. Maybe that's reason why I'm so desensitized to this point. But from there I went into Bubblegum Crisis and Project A-ko, which is not that good. I bet it doesn't really hold up at all. But I just consumed as much anime as I could. Luckily, my mom had the presence of mind to not get me Dragon Knight, as I was begging her to do for me, which I think was softcore porn, essentially. But going fast forwarding to today, anime was like my #1 hobby for a very long time. It has since, like so many other hobbies I have, been kind of consumed by board gaming, but I still enjoy it. I am woefully far behind on keeping up with some of the current anime, which is one of the things I want to do this coming year. I really want to catch up on some great shows that I've heard about and really catch up on that. So who knows, maybe I'll make this a yearly list and we'll see how my tastes change from year to year, because as of right now, most of the anime you're going to see on this list are older. I don't mean like really old, but like a lot of 90s shows, early 2000s, things like that. And by the way, this was the hardest top 10 list I have ever had to do. When I do my board gaming top 10s, if you're new to the channel, I talk about a lot of board games, obviously, and I do a lot of top 10 lists talking about my favorite and least favorite games, but those are always like, yeah, okay, I maybe have like 20 good candidates, whittling it down is not too tough. I had 30 good shows that would easily have been good on anyone's top 10 list for top 10 anime series, and whittling it down was just heartbreaking, so I can't help myself. I gotta give you my 11 through 20 really quick. Number 20 is The Slayers. Number 19, Cyber City Oedo. Number 18, Gankutsuo, The Count of Monte Cristo. Number 17, Soul Eater. Number 16, Mushishi. There's a sequel series of that I want to watch now. Number 15, Toward the Terra. Number 14, Hellsing Ultimate, not the original Hellsing. Number 13, Katana Gatari. Number 12, D. Greyman. And number 11, the one that started it all, the Guyver, specifically the relaunched, rebooted, bio-boosted armor Guyver series, which follows more closely to the manga, although I watched the original OVA series. In any event, that is my 11 through 20, but let's get on to the main event, my top 10 anime series of all time. number 10 is Gurren Lagann, which is an over-the-top like tribute to every single giant robot show that had come before it. Up until the point Gurren Lagann was released, giant robot shows were getting really, really serious and dark, mostly because of Neon Genesis Evangelion. And this was sort of the pushback against that. It's got crazy styled animation. Everyone is loud and boisterous and just makes loud proclamations. It's all about these humans who are living on this world and subjugated, forced to live underground by these beastmen on the surface. And one boy finds this giant head, and he and his friend and some other friends that they come across along the way manage to get back up to the surface. They find, they connect that giant head to another robot, and then just go on robot fighting adventures trying to fight back against these beastmen. It is really just an amazing show, very emotional, really tugs at your heartstrings at times, and just makes you cheer and jump up and shout. Fantastic show. It ends perfectly. One of the best endings I've ever seen in an anime, because honestly, a lot of anime series do not know how to end properly, but this one does it right. Gurren Lagann, my number 10 anime series of all time. My number 9 is The Vision of Escaflowne, also sometimes just called Escaflowne. I watched this show when I was in my teens in high school, and it was just an amazing thing to me because it mixed fantasy and sci-fi in a way that I hadn't seen up to that point in any kind of media, let alone anime. It's all about this young girl from our world named Hitomi who gets dragged over to this fantasy world that's almost like a steampunk type of fantasy world. The people there, they fight dragons and they have swords. It's typical high fantasy, but they also use these Malefs or Gaimalef suits of armor that are sort of magical and steam powered, like dragon hearts fuel them. And one of the main characters, this Prince Vaughn, has the eponymous Gaimalef called Escaflowne that can also transform into a mecha dragon as well. And it's all about Hitomi and Van and all their group of friends fighting back against this evil empire. It's an epic, sweeping story. The animation doesn't hold up as well as I would like, but the characters are awesome. I like the whole idea of it. I love the science fantasy world that they've crafted. That is The Vision of Escaflowne, my number 9.
調子に乗りすぎたな覚悟しやがれ
My number 8 is Berserk, and this is the series and also the manga that I recommend to my friends who don't typically like anime because they think it's too childish and goofy, and these are people that like to play Dungeons and Dragons, they play games like Skyrim, and I'm like, you know what? Check out Berserk, because it is one of the darkest fantasy stories I have ever read or watched. And this is coming from someone who loves Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. So those people, I would also recommend Berserk, people that like that series, because it is all about this swordsman named Guts, who, when the series first starts off, it's kind of in the, well, what would be the present, and he's just like this dark, wandering swordsman with this sword that's just like comically huge compared to the rest of his body. Just sort of, you can just tell he's missing an eye and he's missing a limb, and he's like, he's got a dark past, he's fighting these demons. How did it come to this? The rest of the story is how it came to that. His past as this young swordsman, fully having all of his limbs and eyes, and how he runs into the Band of the Hawk led by this charismatic leader, this band of mercenaries led by Griffith, this charismatic leader, and how he sort of adopts them as a family and vice versa, and how all of it eventually goes wrong. It is a deep, emotional story. There's lots of great fights. It just tells an epic, sweeping story. I'm going to probably use that phrase a lot during the rest of this top 10 list, but I really enjoy it to this day. The manga, I think, is still ongoing, which goes way past where the series ended, so there is like continued reading, so to speak, after the series ends. But even as it is, while it may end on a cliffhanger, it's a solid anime series. That is Berserk, my number 8.
ルルーシュビ・ブリタニアが命じる貴様たちは死ねYes, your highness!
My number 7 is Code Geass Lelouch of the Rebellion and its sequel series Code Geass R2. This is an alternate history story with mecha, of course. I really love those types of stories. Like there was recently The Man in the High Castle that was on Amazon, which is all about what would have happened if the Nazis and the Japanese had won World War II. And fast forwarded like a couple dozen years. But this one is all about what would have happened if France had beaten Britain back in the 1700s. What would have happened then, fast forward 300 years. And what ends up happening is that Britain had to flee to the then fledgling American colonies before our revolution, and then founded the Holy Empire of Britannia. Fast forward to the near future, they have conquered almost all of the world. Every single area gets just a designated number, and they're just subsumed into the Empire of Britannia. And of course, this story focuses on Area 11, which is Japan. There's this prince in exile who wants to get revenge for something that becomes clearer as the story goes on. He meets this young girl who gives him the power of Geass, which, as any D&D player knows, is the power to compel something to do whatever you want them to do, up to and including killing themselves. He uses this power to, takes on another identity known as Zero, rouses the Japanese resistance, and tries to fight back against the Britannian Empire. And of course, I mentioned there are mecha, these nightmare frames, which are like sort of smaller mecha compared to the scale of most anime, including Gurren Lagann. And it's just amazing mecha fights, wonderful animation, a deep, really interesting story, because it's not clear whether or not the main character, who is our protagonist, Lelouch, is insane. And you kind of see his mind start to unravel as time goes on. And sometimes you really hate him and hate the things that he does, but you still want to see him succeed at the same time. It's really, really fascinating, even with the cheesy fan service. That is Code Geass Lelouch of the Rebellion, my number 7.
Hey, wait up! Dapple, look out!
That settles it. The Death Note. It's for real.
My number 6 is Death Note, which tells the classic story of what happens when someone gains absolute power. And as it turns out, what you think would happen happens. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. The old adage holds to be true. It's all about this high school student named Light, who is like the ultimate high school student. He's good looking, girls love him, he's like incredibly brilliant, gets straight A's or whatever the Japanese equivalent of A's are, and he's a great athlete. He's got the whole world in front of him, a fantastic future, but he is bored with life. He sees life as like this corrupt thing that he has no interest in taking part in. He puts on this facade of being like this engaged, good student, good son, but he really just hates the world. And at the same time, there's this Shinigami world, the realm of the dead, where there's these spirits known as Shinigami who sort of write down in these notebooks these magical artifacts when people are about to die. They're like death. They're the custodians of the dead. One of them is incredibly bored as well, decides to come to the human world and drop his death note, his notebook, down for someone to find it and see what happens. Who should find it but Light? And he decides that he's going to use the death note to fix the world. Any name that he writes in the book, so long as he can picture their face, they will die of a violent heart attack. And he even finds out that he can control how people die with the book, and he's going to use this to cleanse the world of all the people that he thinks are evil and rotten and corrupt. That in and of itself is interesting enough, but when a world-famous investigator known as L, a very eccentric investigator, gets into the mix and starts to narrow down who Light may be, even though he's been keeping himself anonymous underneath the guise of Kira, who's like this internet viral phenomena, that cat and mouse chase between these two is what really sells the show, and it's just amazing. Every episode, edge of your seat, compelling, love it, beautifully shot. Even the English dub, which I don't normally like in shows, is really, really good for this one, and I would recommend it. That is Death Note, my number 6.
Hurry up! Follow Mikasa! Avoid fighting if you can! And get to HQ before you run out of gas!
My number 5 has been the new hotness for the last few years, and that is Attack on Titan. People were recommending this show to me, and I was already on my kind of downswing of not being into anime as much as I used to be, and I'm like, all right, I'll check it out. It blew my mind. Every episode of this show is like this edge of your seat cliffhanger, jumping out of your seat like, did that just happen? No, this can't happen. It's both alternately exciting and depressing and dark and grim, and then you're just cheering for the heroes when they succeed. It's this alternate, well, we don't even know what it is yet. Not every mystery of this show has been revealed, but it's either the far future of our world or an alternate world where humans have almost been wiped out completely by these giant lumbering monstrosities known as Titans. They look like giant, naked, deformed people who are seen to be mindless and just want to eat humans. The last bastion of humanity are behind these giant walls set to protect themselves from the Titans. But of course, at the start of the show, those walls begin to fail, and we focus on these young trainees for the military corps that protects the remaining humans and their struggles and how they grow up. And I can't say too much more than that because there are spoilers. And yeah, some of the faults of the show are that the plot twists are kind of you can see them coming a mile away. But even so, when it happens, it's still amazing. The show is just fantastic. It would probably be higher up my list, but I want to see how the story ends and how the mysteries are unraveled. If that's handled well, you can easily see this show shooting up to number 2 or number 1. That's how good it is. Attack on Titan, my number 5. My number 4 is Hunter x Hunter, specifically the rebooted series that started in 2011 and just wrapped up in fall of last year, and hopefully they'll pick it up again because the manga is still ongoing. The original anime series was good as well, and it's really what got me hooked on the series and got me to go and pick up every single manga volume and read all of them in sequence. I was addicted to it. It's an amazing story. It's a shonen anime and manga, but it has more thought put into it than most shonen series that I have read. Most shonen series is, there's this giant enemy, we have to beat him, let's go and train and get stronger, and then we beat him, and then we all go home and everything's fine. Hunter x Hunter has consequences to the actions of its characters, and almost no battle is won just by, I trained, I got stronger, I beat you up, I win. It's more like, we have to work together, come up with a plan, and hope that that plan goes well for us, and there will be sacrifices, and we need to pull this off because, there are dire stakes at hand, and they continue to get more dire as the storyline goes on. It's this alternate version of Earth. In fact, some of the names are really cheesy flip sides of our city names, like York New City. And the major difference, even though the culture is the same, the technology is mostly the same, and there's giant magical creatures, but aside from that, the major difference is the Hunter Association. To be a hunter, you have to pass a grueling series of tests that most people do not pass. You only have like 1 or 2 or none or no successful candidates each year, but if you become a hunter, you are this elite, military, not even a military person, you're just this elite mercenary, is probably the right word, who can go anywhere, do whatever they want, and they get hired to do the jobs that no one else wants to do. But you can also have a specialty, like be a blacklist hunter and hunt down bounties, or be a rare ingredient hunter, or a treasure hunter, an old relic hunter, any of these different things. And people look up to them with the greatest respect. And of course, once you pass the initial test, you find out that, and you may pass another test to discover that you have really cool powers, like a lot of other shonen anime. And specifically, this show focuses on a group of 4 friends who meet each other during the hunter exam. You have Gon, the main character, who's like this precocious 12-year-old boy who's kind of a wild child, who's really innocent and can talk to animals and just everyone loves him as soon as they meet him. You have Killua, who's the same age as Gon, but comes from a family of assassins and wants to kind of get away from that life. Then you have Leorio, who is just kind of happy-go-lucky, typical anime guy who just wants to be a doctor. He's not interested in gaining ultimate power or anything. And then Kurapika, who is the most interesting character, he wants to get revenge for his clan, who's kind of this Native American clan who was killed by this criminal organization known as the Spiders. Oh man, I can go on and on. There's so many fascinating characters. I love the way that the powers called Nen in this show are used. They're just so creative and over the top and wonderful. So much good stuff in this series. It can get kind of weird at times, but it's a good kind of weird, and I love it. That is Hunter x Hunter, my number 4 series of all time. My number 3 is Cowboy Bebop, which is probably number 1 on a lot of other people's lists, but there's just a couple of shows that worked better for me personally that I had more of an emotional attachment to. But Cowboy Bebop is amazing. As far as style goes, it can't be beat. The characters, the music by Yoko Kanno is just, I have every soundtrack. I wore them out listening to them back in high school. And she also did the music for Escaflowne and so many other fantastic shows. It's just wonderful. And the show is all about that style and all these different things blending together. It's sort of an anthology series. Almost every episode is a self-contained story, but there's some overarching plot line connecting some of the episodes. It takes place in the future in space, but it's more of like a Western in space. Just enough technology to make you think that it's a science fiction show. But it's about these band of ne'er-do-wells on this ship called the Bebop. You've got Spike, and who's like this former criminal trying to leave his past behind him. Jet, who's this old grizzled cop. Faye, who's this career criminal, just sort of doing minor crimes, petty crimes around the universe, robbing people. Edward, who is this brilliant hacker, just crazy and over the top. And of course, Ein, possibly my favorite character, just an adorable corgi with computer data in his brain. And all their different misadventures and all these people that they meet and have these sort of emotional storylines, and sometimes it's just fun and wacky. And it's just a fantastic show, and there's a reason why so many people use this as the gateway show to get people into anime, because it works perfectly for that. And I even like the English dub. I know some people don't, but I think it's actually done pretty well in this one, if that's what your option is. Cowboy Bebop, easily my number 3 anime series of all time.
目標に再び高エネルギー反応やばい指示か
My number 2 is Neon Genesis Evangelion, or just Evangelion. And this easily would have been my number 1 even just 10 years ago, and definitely 20 years ago. But it's just a testament to how good my number 1 is. But I still love this show. When this show first came over to the US on VHS and I started picking them up, I was the same age as the kids, the main characters in the show. And because of that, because I kind of had a troubled childhood as well, and the different things that these characters went through, I had an emotional attachment to them and to the show. I just really kind of had that resonance there. If you're not familiar with the show, it's sort of nominally a giant robot show. It's in the future, kind of post-apocalyptic. There's these giant, bizarre creatures known as angels who are attacking the Earth, and there's this government agency in Japan who is unleashing giant robots to fight them with, of course, teenage pilots. That sounds like the cliche setup of many other types of anime shows, and in some ways it is, but it is so much more than that. It is about these characters and their troubled past, not just the teenage pilots, but also the other characters in the show, and it's also about this huge, like, apocryphal story and all these little bizarre things that you're trying to figure out and unravel as to what the ultimate goal of these angels are and what the ultimate goal of NERV, the organization that sends out these robots, is, and how all these things interconnect and work. But at the core of it, when you cut everything else away, it is about these characters, and it's thought-provoking, it's bizarre. Sometimes the show will make you angry, and it doesn't give you all of the answers that you want. It probably never will, but maybe because of that, that's one of the reasons that I love it so much, because it's just this mystery, and I'll always have a soft spot for it. That is Neon Genesis Evangelion, my number 2.
錬成人もなし
見とれてる暇はねえぜ
何バカなミスがあれば沸騰するはずだ
コートが台無しじゃねえか
My number 1 anime series of all time, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Now, the original Full Metal Alchemist anime series was good. I mean, it was a solid show, but it had a lot of issues. It deviated from the manga in some bizarre ways, and it kind of fell apart near the end. The Brotherhood revamp, which followed much more closely to the original manga and had much slicker animation and music, and the voiceover was even better. It's just the ultimate version of Full Metal Alchemist, and it is wonderful from beginning to end. It tells a complete, solid story. Some anime just have a problem keeping the pacing going at on the right way and ending the show. I mentioned that earlier. Just being able to end a show well is just so critical, and Full Metal Alchemist knocks it out of the park in every respect. Cliffhanger episodes, amazing characters, wonderful plot about this alternate version of our world back in like the 30s or 40s where alchemy is a real thing. It's like this magical thing that people can do to transmute one substance to another. You have these two brothers, the Elric brothers, Edward and Alphonse, Ed and Al, who decide that they are they're like these prodigy alchemists, and their mother dies of an illness tragically, and they decide, even though human transmutation is the ultimate taboo that no one should do, they know that it's a bad thing, they think they're smart enough, they're going to do it when they're just these precocious kids. And of course it goes horribly awry. Their bodies are mutilated, and they spend the rest of their lives or the rest of their at least teenage lives, trying to find the mythical Philosopher's Stone to fix their bodies and go back to normal and make up for the sin that they committed. But of course, it's not quite that simple, and they run into a whole cast of characters, heroes and villains. The amazing character of Scar, who's one of the ultimate anti-heroes, anti-villains in all of anime or fiction, and just the 7 deadly sins, the homunculi, and what they represent. It's just great. There's this overarching conspiracy that you go through. And man, from beginning to end, it's an amazing story. This is another gateway anime. I love recommending this to people, to bring people into the hobby, because it's just so good, and it's a complete work of art. I will go ahead and say it. That is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, easily my number 1 anime series of all time. Thanks for watching. I hope you keep watching my optional variant series where we talk about even more amazing pop culture stuff as time goes on. Thank you so much. Take care.